Hi, this is Larry Bauer, Chief Executive Officer of the Family Medicine Education Consortium. And I'm excited today to be joined by two of the pioneers in family medicine. Uh, Let me introduce Dr. David Slauson, who's Professor and Chair of the Department of Family Medicine at Atrium Health, and Dr. Alan Shaughnessy, who is Professor of Family Medicine at Tufts University. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining with me today.
Thank you, Larry.
I'm going to take you back down memory lane a little bit. So I was at Penn State Hershey, and you guys were across the river at Harrisburg Hospital, which no longer even has a family medicine residency program. And that's when we first met. And then a lot of stuff has happened over the years between then and now. But I'd like you to take me back down the beginnings of your work and your collaboration, and just kind of take it where you think it needs to go. Maybe I'll start with you, Dave, then go to Alan.
Well, Larry, there's a moment where Alan and I met and we got started on this thing together, but I'll give you my short lead up to that moment. I trained as a family doc in Michigan. I went to Virginia, did my residency, went back to Michigan, was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the Lower Peninsula, moved to Pennsylvania. While I was in Michigan in Grand Rapids, I one day at a faculty meeting in the residency program there mentioned that I had been in a research study when I was a resident. And because they needed somebody in the department of like 20 or 30 people to do research, they said, okay, you're the research director. And they sent me to McMaster University somewhere in northern Ontario, where it was cold and barren. And I was in a small group with a guy named David Sackett. And I learned about something called critical appraisal of the literature. And it was pretty startling to me. It was actually so startling. It was a week-long course that about halfway through, I said, this is a bunch of crap. I'm going to the airport and I'm leaving. All the people in my small group, the only break they had the whole week to have a chance to go outside and play volleyball. Instead, they stayed inside, spent the afternoon convincing me to stay. It was difficult because all these things that I'd learned at the stellar of knowledge of the world, the University of Michigan, they pointed out all these things that I learned that were with the evidence were wrong, and I just had a hard time believing that. But anyway, it really did sort of jolt my brain, jolt my life, and I came back and I realized it was important to actually look at evidence and not just believe what experts told you. And I started teaching that to other residents, and I kind of dreamed about teaching it to docs in practice, how to read the literature critically. And when I moved to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, one day I was interviewing for a job, a guy named Alan Shaughnessy, and he said something startling to me. And now I'm going to stop and let him tell you his story, how he came to that moment.
So before we lead up to this apocryphal moment, I'll just say that I also went to McMaster University and was introduced to evidence-based medicine. And I came at it from a slightly different viewpoint. I was all for it when I was there. My background in pharmacy, we do a good bit of what we thought of as critical appraisal, but at the time it was cumbersome and not very helpful. We would literally answer a questionnaire of 62 questions about a study, and we'd still not know what to do with the results. So I went to McMaster, came back and said, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard. I was transformed, but not quite in the same way that Dave was. But anyway, that was when I was in Pittsburgh, and I interviewed at Harrisburg. And Dave, I was sitting across from Dave and telling him a little bit about myself. And I said, well, what I've come to realize over the last few months, because I had just been to McMaster, is I said, one of the worst things that we can do for practicing family doctors is have them read the medical literature, because first of all, they're not going to be very good at it. And even if they do it, it's a tremendous waste of time. Now, this is at a time before internet. This is before most information came out of either textbooks or from experts. And I didn't realize Dave had gone to McMaster, and I hadn't mentioned anything about it, but he was a little bit put off by that answer, and I could tell fairly quickly, and I wanted the job. So I said, but I think there is room for it. And I sort of backpedaled a little bit. And after I got the job in Harrisburg at the residency there, and as we started talking about it, we realized we had a lot more in common in our understanding of evidence-based medicine than our disagreement.
Yeah, that's funny. It just kind of it was a little startling because the thing that I was actually considered to be valuable for in my job at the time, he was essentially saying was not practical. But it really wasn't that hard for me to accept it because I knew, actually not even very deep inside, I knew pretty close to the surface that he was right. And I was glad he ended up coming there. And basically, one of the first things he and I did was we figured we have to find a way to make this practical. We really agreed on the fact it was just like an innate thing that we both felt that just trusting information because somebody told you it was true was, just not the way it was going to work going forwards in the future. And we already saw too many examples of things that people taught us that were supposed to be correct were actually wrong when you looked at the evidence. And so we were like, we got to come up with a way to make this practical for docs in the real world. And it's our memory is not going to be perfect with this, but we somehow or another came on this idea of that there were kind of three different variables that really mattered when you looked at information, how useful the information was. One was how relevant was the information. Two was how reliable, trustworthy, valid was the information. And then three was how much work did it take you to get that information? And as Alan said, we were at a time where there was, I remember he and I used to joke about, wouldn't it be cool if we could connect our computers through the roof with wires and we could like look at stuff on each other's computers so that just gives you an idea how long ago it was. We came to work in our stones on our cars, and ran like Fred Flintstone, but it was a while ago, and so we really had to think about that, and we came up initially with what we called our usefulness equation, that usefulness equals relevance plus validity minus work. We showed that to one of our colleagues, a guy named Warren Newton, and he looked at it and he said, "This is pretty good, except you shouldn't have this be plus minuses, but instead it should be what would you say, geometric, where it was relevance times validity divided by work, and that way if either relevance or validity was zero, the whole thing would be useless." And it made a lot of sense, and so that was sort of the beginning of the usefulness equation, and then we had to define what relevance meant. I can let Alan tell you that story. We were driving around in my truck actually when we came up with the ideas of how to define relevance. But go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, certainly. I certainly remember that. We spent a lot of time together on back porches and in cars and various things, just talking about the ideas about really how do we get more people to take what was called then an evidence-based medicine approach to things. And we said, well, the idea especially for family medicine doctors is that the information has to be relevant. And we started thinking about, well, what does relevance mean? And some information clearly is relevant to practice, and some of it is kind of interesting to know, but not really relevant. At the end of the day, you don't know what to do with it. And this is where we started talking about the idea that, well, some of it is really just tells us about how diseases work, or pathophysiology, or even pharmacology of drugs and that sort of thing. But what is it that a doctor wants to do at the end of the day when they're taking care of patients? And that is the idea they want to help their patients either live longer or live better or live both. Long, productive, functional, pain-free life, right? That's what most people want. So we started thinking, okay, that's what information they want to know, is that what I do is going to help someone on average live longer or better or both. So we got really excited about that idea that there's really two boxes of information: the information that helps people live longer, live better, or the other information that's sort of preliminary. Or this is back in the 90s when Saturday Night Live had the Not Ready for primetime players. So we said a lot of information is not ready for prime time. So we can probably ignore that information. Our next trick was to figure out, we said we have to come up with a catchy acronym, because if it takes as long to explain it as I just did, nobody's going to remember it. So we bounced around, and that's where I can remember driving over to Dave's house, probably on a Friday night. We were going to sit on his back porch and drink beer and probably have dinner together. We said, we've got to come up with some sort of acronym. And we bounced around with ideas, and we came up with the two that we settled on, which were disease-oriented evidence, or DOE, DOEs, or patient-oriented evidence, POE. So that was our major breakthrough, was to come up with an acronym, because people will remember things. And then Dave had the brilliant idea that I really liked. He says, well, it's not just patient-oriented evidence, it's patient-oriented evidence that will require you to do something different than what you're doing today. Because if something just confirms what you're doing, that's good to know, but you're not going to change your practice. And if we're going to get people to use research, we have to help them to say, this is why it's important to you. So we said, okay, it has to not only be patient-oriented evidence, but it has to matter. And that means it's going to change what you do. So that's where we came up with the final acronym, which is POEM, patient-oriented evidence that matters.
So I'm gonna
Did I get that kind of right, Dave?
just a little bit.
Yeah.
I remember coming up to Tufts, and I forget exactly when it was, and you guys were offering a course, a very well-developed course. I was very impressed by how your thinking had evolved. Do you want to talk a little bit about that course and your experience with it?
Yeah, so Mary, so when we got the poem thing, we realized what was nice was that it fit with the critical appraisal stuff that we learned at McMaster, because that was kind of what made it valid. And we realized that sort of the gold standard was what we called a valid poem. So it was information that was important to your patients because it definitively said they would live longer or better. It was important to clinicians because it mattered, because it would change their behavior. It was something they weren't doing. And it was valid because the study was well done. And so we said, we got to teach people what these valid poems are, and we got to teach them how to tell what a valid poem is. And so we wrote, the first paper we wrote in the Journal of Family Practice was entitled Information Mastery, Feeling Good About Not Knowing Everything. And so it was our sort of introduction to this concept of a valid poem. And when we first submitted it, Alan mentioned this not so long ago, it got rejected because the editor said, you know, doctors don't need this. They can get all the good information they need from pharmaceutical reps. And we were pretty stunned by that, because Alan was a PharmD, and one of the other things he was teaching at the same time was sort of this idea about fallacies of advertisement, and how you could be fooled by pharmaceutical advertising to do the wrong thing. And so we kind of realized all this stuff really started to fit together, applying evidence to choosing drugs, to avoiding pharmaceutical advertising, to figuring out what journal articles to pay attention to. And so the idea of this course kind of came to mind. And I think the first time we taught it, it was only about 1 or 2 days. When were you, remind me again, when you said you were aware of it, that you kind of just stumbled on us doing it?
So I believe, trying to remember where I was, I believe it was in the 90s, the mid to late 90s.
Yeah, I think the first time we taught the course was somewhere like around 96 or 97. And we just called it Information Mastery. I think there were like 29 people came the first time. After that, it just kind of took off. I mean, it was like within a very short time, Alan and I were doing 2 or 3 talks a month all over the country. You know, this was, everybody was had read our papers. We did Information Mastery 1 and Information Mastery 2. The second one was Information Mastery Jungle. We sort of applied the concepts of relevance and validity to various sources, the pharmaceutical advertising, CME courses, journals, just about everything. We kind of put it all together, and then we made a course out of it. And we started going around and we gave talks at STFM on the various parts of it. We couldn't go wrong. I mean, everything we wrote got published and everything we submitted got accepted. And it was just, it's kind of one of those things where you look back on it and you go, you never meant for this to be anything more than just us trying to make sense of something ourselves. And the time was right because everybody else was ready for it. We just, I think for about 5 or 10 years, it was a whirlwind where we were going all over. And Ellen will tell you, then we started going overseas and different countries. So it's really been quite the ride. And we've all along felt like it really, as you said, Larry, you said it really nicely a couple of times. We felt like it really was the ilk of family medicine. Alan and I remember one time early on explaining it to a guy named Jim Herman, Jim. And we explained it to Jim, and Jim said, family medicine's always been looking for its one unique thing that sets it apart from everything else. And he said, I think you guys got it. I think this is it. And you've called it sort of the intellectual backbone, and we've felt that very strongly. I mean, what's more important than family physicians making sure that the evidence that they use to make decisions on their patients is evidence that has a high probability of making them live longer or live better, and that part of our job is to be responsible to be aware of that information and manage that information, help create that information.
So I'd ask you to comment on this. It's been my observation over the years. I saw what you were teaching in that way of practicing medicine is full of adaptiveness, what I call adaptive capacity. But in the evidence-based movement, there are some wings of the EBM movement that have gotten really rigid. And I think in some ways got in the way of the adoption of your approach. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on that observation. Alan, why don't I turn to you?
Yeah, so certainly evidence-based medicine became this, started in Hamilton, Ontario, as Dave mentioned, and it was very much a backwater medicine, and then it started to become accepted. And that's when we started getting involved with information mastery. But fairly quickly, it turned into this stick that especially clinicians were sort of beat with, which is you're not doing something evidence-based. You're not doing this, and it's not evidence-based. And it really, like you said, people became fairly rigid about it. And we tried to walk the line of saying, no, there's plenty of room. And one of the early mistakes that I think the evidence-based medicine people, especially David Sackett, made is that they forgot that there's a good bit of clinical judgment that goes into the care of patients. And later, the group very quickly added that to their description of evidence-based medicine. But Dave can tell you more, but we got into quite a, David Sackett is largely considered to be the father of evidence-based medicine, and he was the leader of the people at McMaster. Dave and I got into quite a few fairly heated discussions with David Sackett, first over this relatively new thing called email, and then directly face-to-face in a formal sort of debate format of the difference between what we were trying to offer, which was not instead of evidence-based medicine, but was a more practical approach to evidence-based medicine than he had taken. So I think we've gotten past that now, where there's a greater acceptance that that evidence-based medicine can't be so rigid, but on the other hand, somebody said once, evidence-based medicine implies not doing whatever you please, but doing what's best for patients, and figuring that out through the evidence is the backbone of all this. But not all evidence applies to all patients, and that was where it became a little too rigid.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, we actually, one of our colleagues that helped us teach was Lauren Becker, who was at SUNY New York, and he coined this phrase, called Clinical Jazz, where we basically sort of talked about how information mastery was like clinical jazz, where you kind of harmonized evidence, which was sort of the structure, with the improvisation of clinical judgment, with knowing that if you just had evidence, it was tedious. And as Alan said, it was too structured, and it really didn't fit. We were family doctors, and I think the McMaster was more the subspecialist in internal medicine. And it was, to some extent, it was actually it was like family medicine is a huge amount of what we do is taking care of undifferentiated illness with probabilities, and it was just a whole different approach to looking at evidence and using it. So I think that was part of the struggle at first, but we like that idea of the jazz, where you had the improvisation of clinical judgment and the structure of the evidence. And so I think that was the line that we tried to walk for a long time. And we really came to embrace kind of the concept of the probability approach, as opposed to more of the sort of disease-oriented pathophysiologic approach that most clinicians are still trained to kind of think that way. And it's kind of that disease-oriented versus patient-oriented. So often we think that if we fix the disease, it will benefit the patient, and that doesn't always happen. In fact, sometimes you fix the disease and you hurt the patient doing so. And so we really wanted to make sure that we embraced the whole person and the whole approach to applying evidence to everything. Alan talks about that debate. That was in 2003. I had to fly to London to meet with the whole editorial board of the British Medical Journal. And the editor at that time was Richard Smith. And I think Richard Smith was very futuristic, and he saw the future, and he really recognized the value of both what the evidence-based medicine people were doing, but what we were doing also. And I think it was his dream to kind of bring us together. And I think he did. I think he helped to move it along. Over the time, I don't see that there's been as much of that difference anymore. And we also got involved with some of our colleagues in England, and they also, I think, worked hard to bring us all together on this stuff. So it was really nice. The valuable thing was we had this idea that we kind of worked on. Other people saw it and they added to it. One of the things we can talk about a little bit is when Mark Abel got involved with all this, and then we got into the whole idea of putting together information tools. But I won't go down that road quite yet, in case you want to finish talking about something else first.
The other issue that we have of contrasting viewpoints is we often got labeled as, oh, you're one of the evidence-based medicine guys, as if there were relationship-based family doctors and there were evidence-based family doctors, and you were either one or the other, and you had to set up these camps. And we still to this day talk about the idea that they're actually quite complementary to one another, using the best evidence within a relationship that you have with a patient, a relationship that's built on trust, where you can get good information from them, combine it with the best evidence, and then decide, ideally with the patient, what is best for them and move forward. So I think that's been another hurdle that's overcome, is that you're not either relationship-based or you're evidence-based, but you are patient-based, which encompasses both.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of times the opposite happened. I've had patients come to me that would say, hey, my doctor says I have to do such and such. I'm 40 years old. My doctor says I have to get a mammogram. If I don't, they guilt trip me that I'm a bad person. And so they came to me and they said, I heard you're a doctor that says that not everybody should have to have a mammogram. So I would pull out the evidence and say, yeah, let's look at the evidence together. So they would go away with sort of shared decision-making and realize, yeah, it's a reasonable decision for me to make not to have a mammogram based on the best evidence. So if anything, we were almost less structured with it and more patient-based and patient-oriented, as Alan said, as opposed to kind of the traditional method that was supposed to be patient-oriented. If anything, we were more so. We saw it that way. And I think this was also sort of the birth at the same time of the whole movement of shared decision-making. I think as evidence-based medicine came on the scene and the concept of probability-based decision-making, we left sort of the paternalism of the past, where the doctor was all knowing and all seeing and would tell the patient what to do. And, it was a tough world for a while because there was a lot of uncertainty. But I think it all kind of evolved at the same time.
So I've heard you guys present before, in fact, at an FMEC meeting, and you made some comparisons to the movie Moneyball. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that. I think it's probabilistic thinking is, there's a science to it, no question about it. So I'd like you to hear your comments.
I'll let Dave talk about it. But generally, the probability idea is that it's not a yes or no. Is Dave's example outlined just a moment ago, that we tend to think in medicine you either have to do something or you have to not do something. And yes, Dave can explain the Moneyball analogy and how Billy Beane took a baseball team and turned them around.
Yeah, Alan lets me do it because he knows I get excited when I talk about it. The coolest part is we get to show the clip from the movie. That's what always was. There's this clip in the movie where Brad Pitt, who plays my part, but no, Brad Pitt is playing the part of Billy Beane, and he's meeting with all of his baseball scouts, and they're talking about Perez. And they're trying to decide whether they're going to draft him or not. One guy says, he's got a good swing. And the other guy says, yeah, but he can't hit the curveball. And then another guy says, he's got an ugly girlfriend. And one guy goes, ugly girlfriend, what does that mean? And the guy says, ugly girlfriend means he doesn't have any confidence. And they go, okay. And then in the back, you see Billy Beane kind of hit himself, Brad Pitt. And he's like, oh my God, we're picking baseball players based on whether they have ugly girlfriends or not. There's got to be a better way to do this. And so he meets this this character played by Jonah Hill, who's this Yale graduate that basically studied sabermetrics, which is using probability theory and on-base percentage to basically predict which baseball players are going to get on base the most often and score the most runs. And so Billy Beane uses a computer analysis essentially to build his baseball team, and he trades away all these players that everybody thinks are the best players, and he hires a bunch of has-beens and stuff, and everybody thinks he's crazy. The Oakland A's are at the bottom of the cellar, right around the All-Star break, and they're the worst team in baseball, and everybody's laughing and making fun of Billy Beane that he's a total idiot. And he sticks with it. He's strong enough. He's brave enough. He believes in it. He sticks with it. And somehow magic starts to happen, and the A's go on and they win 20 games in a row, and no baseball team had ever won 20 games in a row. On the last day of the season, they actually win their division, and it's incredible. They go from last to first in just one half of a season, and everybody in the world notices this of baseball. And even though they don't win the World Series, the owner of the Boston Red Sox sees what happens, and he calls Billy Beane up and he says, hey, I want to hire you. And Billy Beane ends up, he can't go because he's divorced and his daughter lives in San Francisco and he doesn't want to leave his daughter. But the owner of the Red Sox hires the sabermetrics guy, and he does the same techniques. He uses probability theory, builds his team, and he's got more money. And the Red Sox go on and they break the curse of the Bambino, and they beat the Yankees, and they win the World Series twice in the next 5 years. And so now all professional sports, to some extent, use probability theory. NFL football uses the combine, where they measure all this stuff about the players, and NBA does the same thing, and baseball does. And every profession now, even the legal profession, uses probability theory to help with decision making. But the only profession that really has not embraced it is medicine. Larry, jump into the future, forgetting the history of how Alan and I, got along the way. Where we are today is basically, not a whole lot further than we were back then. We're still trying to get medicine to realize that the paradigm of thought that we're all trained with, that we're stuck in, is that we're imprinted to prioritize pathophysiologic thinking. And we have not embraced the probability model. The model being, look at the best evidence. What's your best evidence? Randomized trials that are well done, that systematic reviews of randomized trials. There's your best evidence. And sometimes those things completely contradict what everybody's been taught. One of the best examples we have right now is it's already almost 3.5 years old. The best evidence from multiple randomized trials that vitamin D, if you give it to a 55-year-old woman who's otherwise healthy, you will actually cause her to be more likely to get a hip fracture than if you give her placebo. And everybody believes that vitamin D actually prevents fractures because it builds bones. Well, you know, that's pathophysiology. We were all taught that. But the reality is, when you look at the patient-oriented outcomes, it causes fractures. And it's almost impossible for clinicians to accept that. They still haven't. We always joke, you know, when we tell them that, they do the moral reflex, like, oh my God, that can't be true. Well, you know, there it is. It's right in front of you, but they just can't look at it. And this is probably the frustration that Alan and I live with every day, is that it's there. The ability to do a much better job in medicine is sitting right in front of us. And we just can't we haven't found the Billy Bean. We keep saying we need a Billy Bean that's willing to step up and test this and say, I'm going to take what you guys got and I'm going to apply it in my healthcare system. And we're going to show everybody that we got the best care, we got the lowest overuse, we got the best cost-effective healthcare, and everybody else says, whoa, what are you guys doing? How did you do that? And that's really what we're waiting for, is that Billy Bean to come forward. And I know I'm jumping to the present and even to the hopeful future, but that's our passion. That's where we're at right now.
So you guys did get a chance to at least partially test that thinking down at the Scott and White system in Dallas, Texas, did you not?
Yeah, let Alan tell that story.
Yeah, we did in a sort of an uncontrolled trial, but Scott and White Hospital System is a massive system down there. I think it's called Baylor Medicine now. And we were invited down to speak to a group of their physicians, all from all specialties. And we ended up going, I don't remember, how many times did we go? 8 times, maybe every 6 months, for eight different times, until we had talked to pretty much all of their medical staff. And some of them embraced it. Some of them, we could tell stories about how we thought we were going to be tarred and feathered on the way out of, way back to Austin to the airport, because they just did not like what we were saying. But our goal was the goal there was to have us come in and really change the culture of the whole place, which I think we did to some degree, because, and again, not a good randomized trial, but I think 2 years after, or maybe the year after we left there, that hospital system was named the, what was it? The Consumer Reports Best Hospital System in the United States, based on their value, which is the quality of care divided by the cost. So we're very pleased with that. We can't say that we were responsible for that or to any degree, but it was, if nothing else, it was the thinking of the administration there, that we need to have people approach medicine, our staff approach medicine in a different way. That maybe was part of the reason why they had such high quality scores.
Yeah, and the Billy Bean there was actually a guy named Don Cawthon, who was a family doc and was the CEO, CMO of the hospital, and he believed in what we were doing, and he created that culture that, you know, we're going to be the best healthcare system in the country because we're going to minimize healthcare that doesn't need to be done, and we're going to pay attention to making sure that we cover everybody and make it affordable and not wasteful. He asked us to help them have the techniques to do that. And you're right, Alan. I mean, it was about 2 years later, Consumers Report said it was Scott and White had the highest quality and the lowest costs. It was the best hospital in the country for a patient to go to. Yeah, you can't say it was us, but there's a pretty good connection there. I think at least was a good pilot study that says, let's give this a try again.
So I'm wondering, the two of you have been at this for a long time. What is it in the medical culture that resists the change, that holds on to the pathophysiological basis for problem solving as opposed to the probabilistic approach? Do you have even a guess what could be going on to cause the stuckness?
Well, I think I think Dave's going to have a different answer, but my answer is in part is that we as humans are really terrible with probability. We don't understand it. We can't manage probability. We have a hard time thinking in that. We like to think in terms of yes, no, right, wrong kind of answers. And pathophysiology, a pathophysiologic approach where you can figure out what happens in the cells, and that translates into the tissues, and that translates into the organs, and that translates into the person living longer or living better, makes a lot of sense, is easy, and doesn't involve probability. The problem, as Dave has already mentioned, is it often doesn't work, and we end up harming people with the best of intentions. So I think that's a big part of it, is just the discomfort that we have with probability, along with the tradition of medicine thinking in this way for thousands of years. Dave, you have anything to add to that?
You know, Alan had a good phrase he just said there. I think the other piece, I completely agree with what Alan just said. I think the other piece is it's kind of that thing that change is always difficult no matter what. And one of the hard parts about this is Alan said that phrase, sort of the unintended harm. It's like, you know, I think one of our favorite quotes is people would rather be deceived than have the truth give them anxiety. And I think there's comfort in sticking with what you've learned and what you know. You know, like I told you at the beginning of this, when I was at McMaster, halfway through that week, I was going to leave because it was so uncomfortable for me to think that all the stuff that I thought I knew and all my level of confidence was being shaken. And it was like, whoa, if you cause one crack in this wall, the whole thing's going to come down. And I realized it didn't, but I think that's a big part of it for everybody. One of the last papers that Alan and I just wrote was published in one of the BMJ journals. It was called Reducing Overuse by Recognizing the Unintended Harm of Our Good Intentions. And, you know, clinicians have good intentions. And, you know, one of the cases we talked about was screening for diabetes. You know, that's like a national pastime. Everybody does it. You have billboards all over the place talk about how bad pre-diabetes is. And yet, if you really look at the evidence and take a probability approach to it, it probably causes more harm than good to check people for diabetes. And that would just, to believe that would cause so much anxiety that nobody wants to go with that. They'd rather just say that's just crazy. That can't be true. So I think that's a big part of it. I agree with Alan.
I think the last piece I'll just jump in and say is that because I've been trying to figure out the whole time we've been talking on this podcast about how we can quote Osler in here. So I'm going to quote Osler in a minute. But it's the basic idea that we always want to do, medicine is very proactive, very active. We have to always be doing something. And a lot of evidence-based medicine says that what we do for people doesn't help them and it might even harm them. Dave's just given a couple of examples. And the quote I think about Osler, he said, we need to hurry up and use that medicine before we find out it doesn't work. And that's the issue that we have with evidence-based medicine, is that it exposes a lot of things that we hold dear and we think are very important in medicine as simply not being effective, and sometimes being harmful.
So I'd like you to comment on this. Dr. Jim Mold's a family physician, used to be out in Oklahoma. He's down in the Carolinas now. And he's written a book and really developed a model of healthcare delivery called goal-oriented medical care. And he said there are 4 goals that people have that we should be supporting. The first is live as long as possible up to the point where life becomes intolerable. 2 is be able to participate in the activities and relationships that provide meaning and pleasure. 3 is make the most of opportunities to develop fully as unique human beings. And 4 is, in the end, experience a good death, free from unnecessary suffering, in accord with personal values and preferences, and consistent with ethical standards. And I'm wondering is, with the pathophysiological approach, there's the focus on what's the disease, how do we fix the disease? In Jim's goal-oriented approach, with these goals for medicine, it's a very different kind of thing. And it seems to me that your approach, your probabilistic thinking, like what can the doctor do that would help a patient achieve those 4 outcomes, as opposed to a disease-free life or a disease fix. Any comments?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Yeah, I think that idea that is right in line with how we think about it, which is we're trying to ask clinicians that at the point where you're making a decision, is this likely to make the patient live longer, live better, or both? And that, I think, fits in with his 4 goals, at least a couple of his goals. And what it prevents us from doing is stopping halfway and saying, well, we're going to control their blood pressure, or we're going to affect some system in their body, but not really knowing. And it also allows us to understand that we have to acknowledge that anytime we do anything for a patient, from touching them to doing an exam to doing surgery to prescribing a medicine, there is some likelihood of harm with that. And we have to balance that all the time versus the likelihood of benefit. And ideally, benefit will outweigh the harm, but that's where the probability comes in once again and makes it so difficult. So I love Jim Mold's conceptualization. It's very similar in some ways, but more expensive than ours. But it's the in the moment, day to day. Don't just do something, stand there, is very difficult in medicine and can get in our way. And that's where when in doubt, we'd rather do something that ends up harming people than when in doubt, not doing it.
The flight to action.
Yeah, Alan. Alan hit this, like the living longer part is pretty easy, like, living longer, but living better, the word better is like, what does that mean? And I think Jim Mold describes the word better a whole lot better than we just did. One time, Alan and I took our usefulness equation and decided to subdivide all of the variables. And I think we figured out there were like 15 different variables that we were able to come up with to we were mathematics nerds a little bit, but trying to define that word better and work in terms of time and all kinds of things. But we had 15 variables, I think, at one time in the usefulness equation. But what I'm really saying is that Jim Mold does a great job at much better description of our phrase of living better. So yeah, we definitely would completely go together with that.
So let me take you forward. So I still think the rest of your work needs to be done. And the rest of the work is transforming, revitalizing family medicine. I personally think the founders would embrace the approach that you're taking. The disease-oriented approach was not something you go to Gail Stevens or Ian McWhinney or any of the other of the intellectual founders. They would not be excited at all about the disease-oriented, but they would be very excited about the person-oriented, and probabilistic thinking, I think, fits very well with that. So how do we get to the transformation? You guys can't retire until this is done. So how are you going to do it, and what do you think could be done?
Well, some things I'm working on with
that one.
some things I'm working on with some colleagues is to try to meld these two ideas together to say that what is family medicine? What is primary care? It is this making decisions within a context of a trusting relationship. That when it boils down to that, and I think that is really resonant with what the founders thought about it, except that it was at a time, I think they knew intuitively that that more medicine was not necessarily better medicine for people.
Absolutely.
But there was at a time when we didn't have the research to support that patient-oriented evidence that matters fits into a relatively recent phenomenon in medical research, which is looking at outcomes. Once, we've been treating people with high cholesterol since the 1960s or late 50s. But it wasn't until I think was it 1984, 1985 that we had the first trial that looked to see if it actually made people live longer. So back when the founders were thinking about this, there wasn't a lot of data to guide, there wasn't a lot of evidence to guide decision making, but there was an intuition that I can harm people with the best of intentions if I'm not careful. And we kind of subsumed that into the idea of a relationship that, trust me, I'll do what's best for you, in an era where we didn't always know what was best for people. Now we can step back and say, well, for a lot of things, we know what's best on average for them, but it's also best for them based on what their goals are. And that's where we can be that interface for people and help them decide what it is of their goals. Sometimes living longer and living better conflict in some way. So who makes that decision? Well, we don't. Patients need to, but they need to be given the information themselves and helped along the way. And I think that's where primary care and family medicine needs to re-envision itself. It's not just about relationships. It's also about helping people make decisions better in a way that will help them.
And I think the other piece we're kind of hoping is going to work is the whole movement toward community-based medicine. In the state where I am, North Carolina, starting in July, Medicaid is going to be totally a capitated system where the clinicians are basically going to sign on to take care of a whole community of patients. And they're going to get a certain amount of money to take care of that entire community. And I think it'll be a motivation for them to say, how do I take high quality care of these people, but how can I do it in an affordable fashion? And I think a lot of what we have to offer helps them make that decision in a fair, equitable way. Where's the stuff that works? What's the stuff that, is what we call overuse, that costs money, that doesn't improve outcomes? I think that we're betting a lot on the fact that that's going to create some big interest in what we can offer.
The one comment I would have to that is, as long as we use the silly metrics that are being used to measure mostly process measures, what's a person's hemoglobin, that's all disease oriented, and it's only going to reinforce it. I mean, if that's what the payer is going to, if there's risk sharing and the practice or the organization is going to lose money because they're not hitting their quote metrics, then what you just described isn't free to happen. They can't migrate towards that. So I'm personally thinking we also need to be talking about the metrics, and we need to be talking about the goals of just like Jim Mold has laid out. And let me just throw out one other thought to you and just see what you think. So it strikes me to introduce probabilistic thinking, given our current medical school curriculum, introducing it in medical school is probably, trying to swim upstream against a really torrential current. What if you introduced it in college? What if there were pre-med programs where they were learning how to do that kind of thinking? Now they're going to come in to medical school and they're going to run into problems because their professors are going to criticize how and they're going to try to get them to fit in. But I'm just thinking about strategies that might be used to break up really the control, the mind control that currently goes on.
Larry, there are some schools now that are actually doing that their curriculum really is built on sort of no longer teaching the traditional Flexnerian, paradigm of pathophysiologic thinking, and they start right from the beginning, telling their students, you're gonna, we're gonna, they cut, some phrases. Alan can probably tell you this better than I can, around case-based. But what they're really doing is they are right from the beginning, creating what's the evidence and creating more of a hierarchical probability approach to making decisions. So I don't know that it's going to be impossible. Sometimes change seems like it's never going to happen, and then all of a sudden it just almost like happens overnight. So it's hard to know, but it is going to require medical education to recognize that it's time to move beyond the traditional Flexner, basic science, then the clinical science kind of approach. But the exciting thing for us is, I think our last count, there are like at least close to a dozen med schools that are saying this is their thing. They're going to do this. A lot of them are newer schools that have just started up, but some of them are other older schools that have gotten some new people there that are saying, hey, we need to change this. But Alan, go ahead. I know you're actually doing that at Tufts.
So one of the things that I've talked to people here at Tufts that get some resonance is that I say we don't need to teach medical students how to be researchers. We need to teach them how to be informed consumers of research. And that fits right into where we find ourselves as a culture right now, whereas we have to have people who are informed consumers of information, because all the rules about information being true or not have totally flown out the window. And we can all point to examples of disinformation that has swayed people. And so I think we may move as the culture there, because we simply have to do that. We have to reestablish some borders of what truth is and what truth isn't. And so we need to create informed consumers of information. Back when Dave and I started this, incredibly as not kids, there was a time when there wasn't an internet. In fact, our early publishing was pre-internet, and now we've got information thrown at us at a fire hose, and we're trying to pick out the good information or not. So I think as a society, we need to get back to there is good information and bad information, and we need to create informed consumers.
So with that, I'm going to bring things to close here, and thank you both for spending the better part of an hour. Again, I'd like to say, in my opinion, that your approach in what you teach is the backbone and should be taught as the backbone, and it should be taught throughout medical school and certainly on the family medicine clerkship and certainly within a residency program. And I think also at the CME level, I think it needs to be threaded all the way through there. And I want to thank you for the contribution that you've made, not only to family medicine, but to medicine and to the health of the country. And I know you guys have struggled. We've known each other a long time, and I've heard about many of the struggles. And you've just been tough nuts, and you won't give up. And I just admire you for that.
Yeah, well, Larry, thank you. And if there's any Billy Beans out there listening right now, get in touch with Larry, and he'll get in touch with us. We're still looking for you.
Absolutely.
You make yourself famous, change the world. Come on up. We need you.
Great.
Yes,
thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Larry.